The hidden millionaire. Imagine waking up every morning to a world where power decides worth, and silence is the only way to survive. Where the rich build empires on the backs of those who can barely afford to dream. Now imagine one man, a billionaire, choosing to walk away from his luxury, to step into the dirt, to feel what it truly means to be human again. This is the story of Michael Davis, a man who hid his identity, wore a factory uniform, and lived among the forgotten. He wanted to know what it meant to earn a single meal, to face humiliation, to see how his own empire treated the people. Who built it? What he discovered changed not only his life, but the lives of thousands who worked in silence. As you listen to this story, ask yourself, if you lost your name, your money, and your power, would people still respect you? Would they still see your worth? Michael's journey exposes the invisible war between wealth and humanity, between greed and grace. It will remind you that true riches are not found in the bank, but in the heart. If this story touches you, don't just watch in silence. Comment below. Share your thoughts. Because the world needs voices that believe in fairness, compassion, and justice. Each time you share a story like this, you give hope to someone who feels unseen. Subscribe, leave your comment, and let's spread this message together, that no one deserves to be invisible, and that even the smallest act of kindness can start a revolution. Because sometimes it takes one person, one choice, to remind us that humanity is the greatest form of wealth, the hidden truth. Michael Davis sat silently in the back seat of the old sedan. Outside the window, the morning city pulsed with life. Buses honking, workers rushing, vendors shouting. He watched them all, a strange mix of sadness and curiosity filling his heart. Few knew that the man now wearing a wrinkled shirt and cheap shoes was, in fact, the owner of one of the largest corporations in the country, Davis Enterprises. But today, he wasn't a CEO. He was just another worker, joining the ranks of the Fae. Ordinary to learn what his money and power had hidden from him. He had heard rumors, whispers of supervisors mistreating employees, deducting salaries unfairly, and ignoring safety issues to cut costs. He couldn't sit in his luxury office and read another report written by managers who filtered the truth. Michael wanted to see it himself, to feel the pain his workers endured. When he walked through the iron gates that morning, no one recognized him. The guards barely looked up. A man named Tom, the shift leader, handed him a dirty uniform and said coldly, "You're late already. We don't tolerate laziness here." Michael nodded quietly, hiding a small smile. He wanted this, to blend in, to see how far humanity had drifted from compassion when money became the measure of worth. The day was long. The factory smelled of oil and sweat. Machines roared constantly. Workers moved like ghosts, tired, silent, fearful. He noticed how some of them skipped lunch because the cafeteria prices had risen again. He offered part of his sandwich to an old man beside him, who whispered, "Thank you, son." They say the owner is a billionaire, but he doesn't know what hunger feels like. Michael looked at the man, his wrinkled hands trembling as he worked, and felt a knot in his chest. That night, he couldn't sleep. He wrote in a small notebook he had brought, "Wealth is not measured by numbers, but by the number of people who smile because of you." The next day, things worsened. He saw a young woman being shouted at by Tom for taking a 5-minute break. Her eyes filled with tears as she explained her mother was sick. Tom didn't care. He threatened to fire her. Michael's fists clenched, but he stayed quiet. He couldn't reveal himself yet. Truth needed to be exposed, not forced. After hours, he followed Tom discreetly. He saw him collecting bribes from suppliers and pocketing part of workers' overtime. The hypocrisy was unbearable. At night, Michael sat alone in his tiny rented room. He reflected on the irony of life, how wealth had created walls between hearts. He whispered to himself, "I built an empire to create jobs, but maybe I built a prison for souls." He planned to stay longer, to uncover everything. But more than that, he wanted to test something deeper, whether true kindness still existed among those struggling. The next morning, a worker named Sarah approached him. She smiled gently and offered him half her breakfast. "You look tired," she said. "Eat. You'll need strength to survive here." He smiled back, humbled by her gesture. In that moment, he realized money could never buy the warmth of a pure heart. And so began Michael's journey, a silent battle between disguise and truth, between power and humanity, between the man he was and the man he wanted to become. Whispers of greed. Michael adjusted his worn-out gloves and joined the morning shift again. The smell of burnt metal filled the air, and the constant hum of machines drowned most conversations. Yet, he had begun to notice small whispers between workers, tales of lost bonuses, missing wages, and managers who took money meant for others. He worked beside Sarah that day. Her eyes were tired, but her kindness never faded. She shared stories about her father, who had worked in the same factory for 30 years until an injury sent him home with no compensation. "They said it was his fault," she murmured. "Now he can't even walk." Michael felt rage boil inside him. He had signed policies for fair treatment, insurance, safety, all of it, but the people below had twisted it into their personal profit. He asked quietly, "Do you ever think things can change?" Sarah looked at him with a faint smile. "Change? Maybe, but not for people like us. The rich live in another world." Her words struck like lightning. She didn't know the rich man she spoke of was standing right next to her. Michael wanted to tell her that not all wealth was blind, not all power was cruel, but he held back. Truth would mean nothing unless it was seen through action. Later that evening, Tom held a meeting. He stood on a wooden crate, pretending to care. "We have to cut wages again," he said, pretending to sound sorry. "The company's profits are down." Michael clenched his jaw. He knew that was a lie. Davis Enterprises had seen record profits that quarter. The reduction wasn't for survival. It was for greed. Some workers protested. Tom threatened them with dismissal. "If you don't like it, you can leave." He shouted, "Plenty of people out there would take your place." Michael watched as silence spread like poison. He realized fear was more powerful than poverty. People didn't speak up not because they were weak, but because they were trapped between survival and dignity. That night, Michael walked outside the factory gates and watched families waiting for loved ones. Children waved as tired parents exited, covered in dust and exhaustion. He saw a little girl run to her father, clutching a small paper flower. "I made this for you, Papa," she said. The man smiled, but Michael could see the pain behind that smile. He wondered, how many dreams have we crushed in the name of profit? He went home and wrote again in his notebook. A company that forgets hearts to fill pockets has already gone bankrupt in spirit. The next morning, something unexpected happened. A new supervisor arrived. A man named Richard. He was confident, well-dressed, and cruel. He didn't just continue Tom's tyranny. He perfected it. He cut safety brakes, demanded higher quotas, and laughed when workers collapsed from exhaustion. Michael couldn't bear it anymore. He confronted Richard quietly one afternoon. "These people need rest," he said. Richard sneered. "You think this is a charity? If they want money, they work. If not, I'll find someone who will." That night, Sarah found Michael sitting outside, his hands trembling with anger. She gave him a cup of tea and said, "You're not like the others. Care too much. But caring doesn't pay bills. He looked at her and said softly, "Maybe caring is what keeps us human." Sarah sighed. "I used to believe that too. But kindness doesn't feed the hungry." Michael thought deeply about her words. He understood her pain, but he also knew that without kindness, humanity was nothing but machinery, efficient but soulless. The next morning, Richard humiliated an old worker in front of everyone, accusing him of stealing materials. The man cried, swearing innocence. Michael couldn't take it anymore. He stepped forward and defended him. Richard shouted, "Who do?" "You think you are?" Michael replied, "Just someone who still believes in fairness." The room went silent. For a moment, even the machines seemed to pause. Sarah looked at him in shock and admiration. Michael knew the road ahead would be dangerous, but it was time to fight for the truth, no matter the cost, the breaking point. The days passed, and tension inside the factory grew thicker than the smoke rising from its chimneys. Michael kept his identity hidden, but his silence was starting to break. Every injustice felt like a wound on his conscience. He had thought he could watch and learn quietly, but seeing people suffer had become unbearable. One afternoon, Richard ordered all workers to stay an extra 3 hours without pay. The air in the room froze. People were exhausted, drenched in sweat, and their eyes pleaded for mercy. Michael stepped forward and said calmly, "We've already met the production quota for the week. Why push them further?" Richard turned sharply. "You again. You seem to have a lot to say for a nobody." Michael looked him in the eye and replied, "A nobody who still believes people deserve respect." Laughter erupted among the supervisors, but the workers stayed silent. Sarah looked frightened. She knew that speaking against Richard meant punishment. Still, Michael didn't care. His mission had changed. It was no longer about gathering evidence. It was about giving these people a voice. The next morning, he found that his time card had been marked absent. Despite working the full shift, his pay was cut in half. He confronted the timekeeper, who whispered nervously, "I'm sorry." Orders from above. Michael smiled bitterly. So this was what justice looked like for the poor: silence and fear. He continued his work, now with more determination. Every small act of kindness, he saw, became a reminder of what truly mattered. One worker shared his last piece of bread with another. Sarah offered comfort to a young man whose mother was sick. In a place where greed ruled, kindness had become rebellion. That evening, Michael sat alone on a bench outside the factory. He took out his notebook and wrote, "Money creates power, but only empathy creates legacy." He stared at the stars above, realizing how far his own world of luxury had drifted from this simple truth. A few days later, an accident occurred. A machine malfunctioned, and a young worker named Luis was injured. The alarm rang, but Richard ordered everyone back to work. "He's fine. Don't waste time," he shouted. Michael ran to Luis's side and saw blood dripping from his arm. Without hesitation, he tore part of his shirt and bandaged the wound. "He needs a doctor," Michael yelled. Richard crossed his arms. "If he leaves, he loses his pay for the day." Michael stood up slowly, his voice trembling with fury. "And if he dies, what do you lose?" Everyone went silent. Sarah's eyes widened in shock. Richard looked furious but didn't reply. Michael helped Luis walk outside to get medical help. That moment spread through the factory like wildfire. People began to whisper. Maybe someone had finally dared to care. That night, Sarah visited Michael's small rented room. She looked both worried and grateful. "You shouldn't have done that," she said softly. "He'll come after you." Michael smiled faintly. "If standing up for someone costs me my job, then maybe I've been working for the wrong kind of company." Sarah sat beside him. "You speak like someone who's not from here," she said curiously. Where did you come from? Michael hesitated. From a place where people think success means stepping on others. But I came here to remember what it feels like to stand beside them instead. She didn't understand the full meaning, but she nodded slowly. You're strange, she whispered, but I hope you never change. The following week, things escalated. Richard began targeting Michael. Openly, he gave him the hardest tasks, made him work longer hours, and insulted him in front of others. Yet Michael endured it all with calm determination. His silence became louder than any argument. The workers started respecting him, not because they knew who he was, but because he represented courage. They had forgotten existed. One morning, a rumor spread. The regional director was visiting the factory the next day. Richard panicked and ordered everyone to clean, fix, and fake productivity. The irony made Michael almost laugh. For weeks they had lived in misery, but now that authority was watching, they suddenly mattered. That night, he couldn't sleep. He thought about revealing himself, ending the charade, and restoring justice instantly. But then he remembered the look in Sarah's eyes, the quiet strength of the workers. Change imposed from above would fade. Real change had to rise from below. From hearts awakened, not orders given. The next day would test everything. The visit, the lies, the truth, and his disguise itself. The day of the visit. The sun rose over the factory, casting long shadows across the yard. The workers moved nervously, cleaning every corner, polishing machines that rarely saw maintenance, and arranging boxes to look orderly. The rumor had become truth. The regional director was coming for an inspection. For the workers, it meant a day of false smiles and forced obedience. For Richard, it meant an opportunity to impress his superiors. For Michael, it meant a moment of truth. Richard strutted through the corridors, shouting orders. Move faster. The director will be here in 1 hour. And remember, no one complains about anything. He turned to Michael, sneering. You, new guy, you keep quiet. I don't need your hero speeches today. Michael nodded calmly, hiding the storm inside him. He had decided today would be the day he stopped pretending. When the black cars finally arrived, silence fell. Men in suits stepped out, led by Mr. Howard, the regional director. His expression was cold and detached, the kind that came from years of bureaucracy and distance. From real hardship. Richard greeted him with exaggerated politeness, guiding him through the factory as if it were a palace. The workers watched, forced to keep working while being observed like machines. Sarah whispered to Michael, They always come once a year, pretend to care, and leave with smiles. Nothing ever changes. Michael didn't reply. His heart pounded. He knew that soon he would reveal everything, not with anger, but with truth. As the tour continued, Mr. Howard asked superficial questions. Richard lied smoothly, presenting charts and fake records. Our workers are happy, sir. Offer fair wages and safe conditions, he said confidently. Michael felt his blood boil. He looked around. The peeling paint, the broken safety rails, the tired faces of workers, none of it matched those polished words. Finally, they approached Michael's section. Richard gestured arrogantly. These are our new recruits. Hard-working, loyal people. He looked at Michael with a smirk, daring him to speak. Michael stepped forward slowly. Sir, he said, looking at the director, may I ask a question? Richard's face went pale. He's new here, he interrupted. Doesn't know how things work? Mr. Howard raised his hand. Let him speak. Michael's voice was calm, steady. Do you believe numbers tell the truth? The director frowned. I'm not sure what you mean. Michael pointed toward the workers. Those charts show profits. But have you ever measured the cost of a broken spirit? The price of fear? The room grew still. The workers froze, watching in disbelief. Richard's smile disappeared. Michael continued, "This factory is not built on efficiency. It's built on silence. People here work because they're afraid of losing the little they have. They don't need sympathy. They need justice." Richard burst out, "Enough! You're fired." But before he could say another word, Mr. Howard spoke sharply, "Let him finish." Michael looked directly at him. "If this company truly values honesty, then it should start by facing itself. Look at the pay cuts, the injuries, the exhaustion. Look beyond the numbers. Ask why the richest ones never visit the factory floor." The director seemed uncomfortable. Richard tried to regain control, laughing nervously. "Sir, he's clearly just an angry worker." Michael took a deep breath. "Then maybe you should know who I really am." He reached into his pocket, pulled out his identification card, the golden badge of Davis Enterprises. A gasp spread through the crowd. Sarah covered her mouth in shock. Richard's face turned white. Michael said firmly, "My name is Michael Davis. I'm not just a worker here. I own this company." The silence was deafening. The workers stared in disbelief. Mr. Howard's eyes widened. Richard stammered, Sir, I had no idea." Michael cut him off. "That's the problem. You never cared to know. You only saw people as tools, not humans." He turned to the workers. "I came here to see the truth for myself. What I found broke my heart. I saw dedication, loyalty, and pain, all buried under greed. This ends today." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. The workers began whispering among themselves. Hope, something they hadn't felt in years, flickered in their hearts. Michael turned back to the director. "From this moment, I'm reinstating fair wages, medical benefits, and proper working conditions. Those who exploited others will face investigation. This company will no longer be built on fear, but on fairness." Richard fell to his knees. "Please, sir, I have a family." Michael looked down at him. "So do the people you've been starving. Remember that next time you measure your worth." The workers erupted in applause. Tears rolled down Sarah's face as she whispered, "You really were one of us after all." Michael smiled softly. "I always was. I just forgot for a while." That day became the turning point. For the first time, the workers felt seen. The man they had cursed in their hearts had turned out to be their savior, not because of his money, but because he remembered what it meant to be human. After the revelation, the factory was different the next morning. It wasn't just the air. That had changed. It was the silence. But this silence was no longer filled with fear. It was the quiet before rebirth. The workers whispered in disbelief, wondering if the events of yesterday had truly happened. Could it be real? The man who had worked beside them, shared their food, and stood up for them was actually the owner of it all. When Michael arrived that morning, there were no guards or luxury cars. He walked through the same gates, wearing the same uniform. But this time, the guard stood straighter. The workers greeted him with shy smiles, and hope, fragile but alive, floated through the air. Sarah approached him nervously. "Sir," she said softly, "or should I call you Mr. Davis now?" Michael smiled. "Michael is fine. Titles don't change who I am." She hesitated, then asked, "Did you really mean all those things? About the changes?" He looked at her firmly. "I meant every word. I built this company to create opportunity, not oppression. Somewhere along the way, I forgot that." Sarah nodded slowly. "You didn't forget. You just needed to see it again." Throughout the day, Michael called for meetings. He spoke directly with workers, listening to their stories, their struggles, and their ideas. He discovered talents hidden beneath fatigue, artists, thinkers, engineers, all buried under poverty. He promised to establish programs for education, safety, and fair wages. But he knew that promises alone were not enough. The true test would be time and consistency. At noon, he gathered everyone in the main hall. The same space that had echoed with Richard's cruelty now carried something entirely new: sincerity. Michael stood before them, not as a boss, but as a man who had learned humility. "I saw greed dressed as success," he began. "I saw people treated like numbers. I saw my own company becoming something I never wanted. But the truth is, I am not here to be your savior. I'm here to be accountable. Because leadership is not measured by control, but by conscience." The workers listened in silence. Sarah stood near the front, tears glistening in her eyes. Michael continued, "You taught me something money never could, that respect must be earned, not bought. And that wealth without humanity is just emptiness in disguise." Applause broke out, hesitant at first and thunderous. Some workers cried openly. Others bowed slightly, not in submission, but in gratitude. For the first time in years, they felt human again. Later that day, as Michael walked through the factory floor, he stopped by the broken machine that had injured Luis. It had been repaired. Luis was back, his arm bandaged, but his smile wide. "Thank you, sir," he said, "for not forgetting." "You," Michael placed a hand on his shoulder. "Thank you, Liz. You reminded me what leadership really means." That evening, after everyone had gone home, Michael sat alone in his office, the same office he hadn't entered in weeks. He looked around the expensive furniture, the glass walls, the polished floor, and realized how disconnected these things were from the world outside. He opened his notebook again and wrote, "A man can own 1,000 buildings, but if he loses the ability to feel another's pain, he owns nothing at all." The next day, Michael announced new reforms publicly. He invited the press and opened the factory gates. He didn't hide what had been wrong. Instead, he showed it openly. "We made mistakes," he told them. But the difference between greed and growth is the courage to admit them. Reporters asked why he had disguised himself. Michael replied, "Because wealth blinds you if you never step into darkness. I needed to see the truth without the filter of privilege." The story spread quickly. Newspapers called him the millionaire who worked among the poor. Some praised him as a hero. Others called it a publicity stunt. But for Michael, it didn't matter. What mattered was the change that had already begun inside the factory and inside himself. One afternoon, Sarah visited his office. She carried a small box wrapped in paper. "This is from all of us," she said, handing it to him. Inside was a simple wooden sculpture, a pair of hands, one strong, one fragile, holding each other. "We made it in our free time," she explained, "to remind you that real strength is shared, not shown." Michael smiled, his eyes softening. "I'll keep it here," he said, placing it on his desk. "It'll remind me every day why this company exists." As she turned to leave, he added quietly, "Sarah, one day I want you to lead here. You have what this place needs, heart." She froze, overwhelmed. "Me? I'm just a worker." He smiled gently. "So was I once." That night, as lights dimmed across the city, Michael stood by the window of his office. The factory below buzzed with new energy. For the first time, it felt alive, not as a machine of production, but as a place of purpose. He whispered to himself, "Money builds walls, but humanity breaks them. And when those walls fall, we remember what it means to be rich, not in possessions, but in people." The price of change. Change did not come easily. In the days that followed the revelation, The entire company trembled under the weight of transformation. Some embraced it with open hearts, but others, those who had profited from corruption and lies, whispered in the shadows. For them, Michael's awakening was a threat, not a miracle. He sat in his office one morning, reviewing the reports. Salaries were being corrected, safety programs were implemented, and new supervisors were trained. But beneath the numbers, something darker stirred. Anonymous letters arrived on his desk. Some warned him to stop. Others mocked him for playing. The poor man's savior. Michael smiled faintly. The same courage that had led him into the factory now kept him grounded. He had seen real suffering. No insult could match the pain he had witnessed in those tired eyes. Still, he knew the challenge wasn't over. Real change meant shaking the foundation of comfort, and the wealthy rarely surrender comfort willingly. Several board members requested an emergency meeting. When Michael arrived, the room was filled with tension thicker than smoke. One of the directors, Mr. Cole, leaned forward. "Michael, with all due respect, your reforms are destroying our profit margins. You're turning a business into a charity." Michael looked at him calmly. "A charity gives for free. We are giving people what they've earned." Another member chimed in. "But our investors," Michael interrupted. "Investors don't build companies. People do. And when you build on exploitation, you build on sand." The room went silent. Michael stood up slowly. "If being human means losing a few million, then I'll pay the price." He walked out, leaving a stunned silence behind. Outside the building, reporters waited. Cameras flashed. Questions flew through the air. One asked, "Mr. Davis, do you regret revealing your identity?" Michael smiled. "Regret? No. I regret that I didn't do it sooner. Because what I've learned is simple. Money without morality is poverty in disguise." His words spread across media outlets. Some praised him as a visionary. Others called him naive. But those who had worked beside him, the ones who had seen the truth, knew he meant every word. That week, Sarah was promoted to oversee worker relations. When she entered his office, she still looked uncertain. "Sir, I don't know if I'm ready for this," she said quietly. Michael smiled gently. "You were ready the moment you decided to care." She laughed softly. "You make everything sound easy." He shook his head. "Nothing about this is easy. But easy is what made us blind in the first place." Together, they worked late into the night, planning training sessions, community programs, and mentorship projects. The company's profits dipped temporarily, but productivity rose. People began working not out of fear, but with pride. Michael often walked through the factory now, without security or fanfare. The workers no longer bowed. They greeted him like an equal. It was the respect of truth, not of position, but not everyone was happy. Richard's allies in management were quietly removed, yet resentment brewed. One evening, as Michael was leaving, a stone shattered his car window. A note was attached to it. "You'll ruin us all." He picked up the note, looked at it for a long time, and then folded it carefully into his pocket. Fear had no place in his heart anymore. He had already faced the ugliest truth, indifference. Weeks later, he was invited to speak at a financial conference. The audience was full of CEOs, bankers, and entrepreneurs. He began his speech not with pride, but with humility. "I stand before you not as a success story, but as a man who once mistook wealth for wisdom. I built empires of glass, but never noticed the cracks until I walked barefoot among the broken pieces." The hall went silent. He continued, "The greatest bankruptcy is moral. You can lose money and rebuild it. But when you lose empathy, you lose everything." Some clapped. Others remained quiet, unwilling to face the reflection in his words. But among them were a few who felt something stir, guilt, maybe, or awakening. After the event, a young entrepreneur approached him. "Sir, I used to admire you for your business empire," he said. "Now I admire you for something else. Courage." Michael smiled. Courage doesn't come from never falling. It comes from standing up when you finally see the truth. That night, back in his office, he looked once more at the small wooden sculpture Sarah had given him, the two hands holding each other. He ran his fingers over it and whispered, "This is what success should feel like. Not applause, not fear, but connection." He closed his notebook for the last time and wrote his final line. "The richest man is not the one who has everything, but the one who gives everyone a chance to be something." And with that, Michael turned off the lights, leaving behind not just an empire, but a legacy built on truth, compassion, and the priceless wealth of humanity. Echoes of the past. Months passed, and the company slowly transformed into something entirely new. The factory that once symbolized fear and exploitation now breathed life and hope. The walls were freshly painted, safety signs were installed, and the workers walked with quiet dignity. But for Michael, the transformation wasn't just external, it was personal. Every corner of the building carried a memory, a reminder of the man he used to be. He often walked the same path he had once taken as a disguised worker. Sometimes he would pause beside a machine and remember the smell of grease, the ache in his arms, and the faces of those who had shared their pain with him. He could still hear the whispers, the cries of the unheard. But now, those whispers had turned into laughter. One morning, Sarah entered his office with a box full of letters. "These are from the workers," she said. "They wanted to thank you personally." Michael opened a few. Some were simple notes of gratitude. Others were stories of families who could finally afford medicine, education, or even a small celebration. Each word filled his heart with warmth, but also with humility. "This is their victory," he said softly. "Not mine." Sarah smiled. "Still, they believe in you." He looked at her and replied, "Belief is a dangerous thing. It's powerful, but it must be deserved every day." Despite the changes, not everyone forgot the past. There were still scars left by years of injustice. Some older workers struggled to trust the new management. Michael didn't blame them. Trust was fragile, and time was the only cure. One day, he decided to visit the home of the old man he had once shared his sandwich with, the one who had told him, "The owner doesn't know what hunger feels like." The old man, Mr. Harris, was retired now. When Michael knocked on his door, he was surprised to see him standing there, cane in hand, eyes filled with disbelief. "Mr. Davis?" He whispered. "You came to my house?" Michael smiled. "I owed you a visit. You once told me the truth when no one else dared to." They sat together on the porch, sipping tea. Mr. Harris chuckled. "Never thought I'd share tea with the boss himself." "Neither did I," Michael replied with a soft laugh. "But I guess life finds strange ways to teach us humility." Mr. Harris grew serious. "You changed a lot, sir. Most men with money don't look back." Michael nodded slowly. "Maybe I'm not looking back. Maybe I'm just making sure the past doesn't repeat itself." They sat in silence for a while, watching children play in the street. Then Mr. Harris said, "You know, the world doesn't need more rich men. It needs more men who remember being poor." Michael smiled thoughtfully. "Then maybe that's the kind of rich man I want to be." As he drove back, he couldn't shake those words from his mind. They echoed within him like a quiet anthem. When he reached the factory, he gathered the supervisors and said, "From now on, every decision we make must pass one simple test. Would you still make it if it affected your own family the same way?" The supervisors exchanged glances, but nodded. Slowly, a new culture was forming, one rooted in accountability and empathy. Weeks later, Michael received a letter from the city mayor, inviting him to speak at a youth leadership event. He hesitated at first. He had never liked being in the spotlight. But Sarah insisted. They need to hear from someone who's seen both sides of success, she said. So he agreed. Standing on the stage in front of hundreds of young faces, he spoke from the heart. When I was your age, I thought success meant power. I thought it meant owning more, controlling more, earning more. But life showed me a different truth. Success is not what you have. It's who you lift when you rise. The audience was silent. Some students wiped tears from their eyes. He continued, if you ever find yourself with more than you need, don't build higher walls, build longer tables. After the speech, a young man approached him. Sir, he said shyly, my father works at your factory. He used to come home angry and tired every day. Now he comes home smiling. I just wanted to say thank you. Michael felt a lump in his throat. Tell your father that it's me who should thank him for reminding me what real work looks like. As months turned into a year, Davis Enterprises became a case study in ethical transformation. Other business owners visited to learn from Michael's reforms. Some copied them for profit, others for genuine change. He didn't mind. Every small spark of goodness mattered. But one night, as he stood alone in the factory, after everyone had left, he looked around and whispered to himself, the true reward of change isn't recognition, it's redemption. He closed his eyes and listened. The faint hum of machines, the distant laughter from the workers' dormitory, the heartbeat of a company reborn. And in that moment, he understood that wealth wasn't something to be counted. It was something to be shared, a test of legacy. A year later, the world had changed around Michael Davis, but his greatest challenge was still ahead. Success had returned, but now it came with expectations, scrutiny, and pressure from those who didn't understand his path. Competitors called him idealistic, shareholders called him reckless, and journalists called him unpredictable. Yet none of that mattered to him. He had already learned that public opinion was the cheapest currency. One morning he received a letter marked confidential. It came from the auditing department. The contents shocked him. A senior accountant, someone he trusted, had been secretly accepting bribes from an outside contractor. The betrayal cut deep. For Michael, it wasn't about the money. It was about the principle. That afternoon, he called a meeting. The board gathered again, waiting for another storm. He placed the letter on the table and said quietly, integrity isn't negotiable. From this day forward, every contract will be reviewed personally by an ethics committee. And if anyone disagrees, the door is open. The room fell. Silent. A few resigned that very day. Michael didn't try to stop them. He knew the cost of cleaning corruption was always losing comfort. Later, Sarah walked into his office. You look tired, she said gently. He smiled faintly. Change has a price. I just didn't expect it to keep collecting interest. She placed a cup of tea on his desk. You once told me money builds walls, but humanity breaks them. Don't let exhaustion build a new wall around your heart. Michael looked at her, touched by her wisdom. You've learned too well, he said softly. Weeks passed, and word of his ethical reforms spread. Beyond the company, universities invited him to speak. Documentaries featured his story, and even government officials sought his advice. But Michael remained humble. He refused awards and turned down interviews that tried to glorify him. Don't turn morality into marketing, he often said. If it's real, it doesn't need a spotlight. Yet fame had its own gravity. People began visiting his office daily, young entrepreneurs, reporters, and even struggling families hoping for help. Michael helped where he could, but he reminded them all, charity is not the solution. Dignity is. One day, he received an unexpected visitor, Richard, the former supervisor. He looked older, thinner, and ashamed. "I came to apologize," he said. "I was wrong. Greed blinded me." Michael looked at him for a long moment, then said, "I forgave you the day I fired you. Holding anger only makes you poorer." He handed Richard a small envelope. Inside was a letter of recommendation. "Everyone deserves a second chance," Michael said. Tears welled up in Richard's eyes. "You'd still trust me," he whispered. "Not with money," Michael said, smiling slightly, "but with humanity, yes." After Richard left, Sarah said, quietly, "You always find a way to forgive." Michael replied, "Because I've been forgiven too, by life itself." Months later, the company celebrated its centennial anniversary. The main factory was decorated with banners, and workers from every department gathered in the courtyard. Michael stood on the stage, looking out at thousands of faces, faces that once held despair, but now reflected pride. He began to speak. "When I walked into this place years ago, I thought I was searching for the truth about my company. But I was really searching for the truth about myself. And I found it here, not in reports or profits, but in the eyes of those who never gave up." The crowd listened in silence. "This company does not belong to me," he continued. "It belongs to everyone who believed that honesty can still win. It belongs to every hand that worked, every voice that dared to speak, every heart that refused to break." Applause thundered through the courtyard. Michael raised his hand and said, "If I've learned one thing, it's that leadership isn't about being followed. It's about walking beside others until they no longer need you to lead." Sarah wiped tears from her eyes as the crowd chanted his name, but Michael only smiled, quietly stepping back from the stage. He never wanted to be worshipped. He only wanted to leave something real behind. Later that night, after the celebration ended, he stood alone under the factory lights. The world felt calm, almost sacred. He whispered, "Legacy isn't what people remember about you. It's what they continue because of you." He looked at the stars above, the same stars he had once stared at from a small rented room, wondering what kind of man he wanted to be. Now he knew the answer. He turned off the lights, walked through the gates, and disappeared into the quiet city. Behind him, the factory glowed softly, no longer a monument to wealth, but a beacon of humanity. The final lesson. The years rolled on, and the name Michael Davis became more than a name. It became a symbol. Business schools studied his methods. Newspapers spoke of his transformation, and people across the world told his story. Yet to him, fame remained as light as dust. He didn't chase it, nor did he care for it. All he wanted was peace, the quiet satisfaction of knowing he had done the right thing. As time passed, Michael began spending more days away from the office. He preferred visiting the factory floor, talking to the workers, listening to their laughter, their worries, and their dreams. He had learned that true leadership had nothing to do with distance. It was about presence. One morning, he visited a new section of the factory where young apprentices were being trained. A girl, no older than 18, approached him shyly. "Sir," she said, "my father said you changed his life. He used to hate his job. Now he teaches me everything he knows with pride." Michael smiled warmly. "Then your father changed both our lives, because he reminded me why this place exists." As he walked through the aisles, he saw life thriving where there had once been despair. The machines no longer roared like monsters. They hummed like instruments of progress. The walls were covered with photos of workers, their families, and stories of achievement. Michael paused at one picture. It showed Sarah surrounded by a group of new employees. A small plaque beneath it read, "Leadership through empathy." He smiled, feeling both proud and humbled. Sarah had become the kind of leader he had always dreamed of creating, not because of titles, but because of compassion. That afternoon, he sat in his office for what felt like the first time in ages. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, painting stripes of gold across his desk. He opened his old leather notebook, the one he had carried during his days of disguise. The pages were yellowed and torn, but the words were still alive. He reread his first entry. Wealth is not measured by numbers, but by the number of people who smile because of you. He whispered softly, "It took me a lifetime to understand my own words." A knock came at the door. Sarah entered, holding a small package. "It's from the workers," she sighed. "They said it's for you." Michael opened it carefully. Inside was a simple gold watch, engraved with the words, "For the man who gave us time." He chuckled quietly, emotion swelling in his chest. "They shouldn't have," Sarah smiled. "They wanted to. You gave them more than fair wages. You gave them dignity." He looked at her with fatherly warmth. "And you gave them hope. Promise me you'll never let this place lose its heart." She nodded. "I promise." That evening, Michael left the office for the last time as CEO. He handed over his position to Sarah, knowing the future was incapable hands. The board applauded him as he left the building, but he waved modestly, smiling at the workers instead. They were the ones who mattered most. Outside, he took a long walk through the streets, now lit by the soft glow of the city he had helped change. Every corner seemed familiar, yet new. He saw families shopping, children laughing, and vendors calling out to customers. All scenes of life he had once been too busy to notice. He stopped at a small park bench and sat down. The night air was cool. Above him, the stars shimmered, and he remembered that first night he had written in his notebook. As a disguised worker, the pain, the exhaustion, the loneliness, all of it had been worth it. He thought of the lessons life had taught him, that money reveals character more than it changes it, that kindness is not weakness, and that power only matters when it protects the powerless. He smiled to himself, whispering, "In the end, every fortune fades, but goodness doesn't depreciate." Years later, people would speak of him not as a billionaire, but as a man who remembered how to be human. A man who proved that wealth is not what you keep, it's what you give that multiplies. When Michael passed away quietly in his sleep a few years later, the company held a memorial at the factory. Workers from every generation attended. Sarah stood before them, her voice trembling as she read his final note, found in that same old notebook. If one man can change himself, he can change a company. If one company chooses conscience over greed, it can change the world. As she finished, tears filled every eye in the room. The machine stopped for a moment of silence, not out of command, but out of respect. And in that stillness, the hum of his legacy continued. Outside the factory gates, a bronze plaque was installed. It bore Michael's favorite words, "Be rich in kindness, not just in coins." Children from the workers' families came every year to touch that plaque, learning the story of the man who had once hidden among the poor to find the richest truth of all, that humanity is the greatest fortune. And so, the story of Michael Davis, the man who disguised his wealth to uncover the truth, lived on, not in books or monuments, but in every life he had lifted. His final lesson echoed across generations. Money may build empires, but only mercy can make them last.